Putin just sent a message that has British intelligence physically freezing in place, and it landed less than 1 minute ago. Not a rumour, not a leak. A direct warning that has senior officials scrambling so fast Parliament actually issued emergency orders before dawn. And the question hanging over London right now is terrifyingly simple. What did Russia just threaten to do? According to multiple government insiders, speaking only off the record because the situation is far too unstable, the warning was delivered through a secure diplomatic channel normally reserved for wartime communication. Yes, wartime. And the moment it arrived, every alarm inside Whitehall started ringing. Staff were pulled from their homes. Intelligence analysts cut their briefings mid-sentence. Military liaisons, some still in their suits from last night's events, were rushed underground for classified updates. By the time most of Britain was still fumbling for the kettle, Parliament was already in a full-blown crisis session. Not a debate, not a discussion, a closed-door emergency assembly with orders so strict that MPs had to surrender their devices at the door. One senior official described the mood inside the chamber as colder than the Kremlin in winter. Whatever Putin sent, it didn't just startle them, it shook them. And here's where it gets even worse. The Speaker issued an unprecedented instruction, all members to remain on immediate standby until further notice. That kind of order isn't used for diplomatic spats or political theatre. It's reserved for threats that require real-time decision-making. The kind where every minute matters and one wrong move can spiral into something nobody can control. Curiously, the government still refuses to release the exact wording of Putin's message. Every press inquiry today was swatted away with the same robotic phrase for national security constraints. Because apparently, when a nuclear power threatens your country, the best thing to do is tell the public absolutely nothing and hope they stay calm. That always works, right? But silence can be louder than any statement. And Britain heard that silence loud and clear. Social feeds exploded with speculation. Former diplomats hinted this could be the harshest communique the Kremlin has sent to the UK in decades. And insiders claim the tone of the message was unusually final. Not a negotiation, not a complaint, a demand. The Prime Minister stepped up to the dispatch box this morning, trying to look composed, but even through the camera lens, he looked like someone who had just read something he wished he hadn't. He repeated bland assurances about appropriate responses and ongoing evaluations. But the problem is simple. Nobody believes him. Not the opposition, not the public, not even members of his own party sitting directly behind him. One Conservative MP reportedly confronted a minister in the corridor demanding, "Is this a warning or a countdown?" The minister didn't reply. He just walked away. Meanwhile, intelligence officers have been spotted moving between buildings in unmarked vehicles. Late-night helicopter activity over central London was caught on live streams. And sources close to the Ministry of Defence say the UK has quietly elevated multiple readiness protocols, steps that only happen when a foreign threat is considered active, not theoretical. And still, the big question remains unanswered. What did Putin say? What was so severe, so explosive that Parliament locked itself down before sunrise and issued urgent orders without even briefing the public? Because here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. If this message includes a threat with a deadline, then the clock is already ticking. What happened next didn't just raise eyebrows, it detonated them. Because as the political chaos spread through Westminster, a second wave of information leaked from inside Whitehall. And it was even more explosive than the warning itself. Multiple senior civil servants, people who normally wouldn't whisper a word unless their careers were on fire, began hinting that Putin's message wasn't just angry or aggressive, it contained a specific accusation and a direct consequence, the kind that forces governments into corners they cannot escape. According to one source, the Kremlin claims Britain crossed a strategic threshold. A phrase intelligence analysts haven't heard since the Cold War, and the alleged response Russia is threatening? Not diplomatic retaliation, not sanctions, something far more direct, something that triggered urgent consultations with NATO before the morning coffee even finished brewing. Within minutes of these whispers circulating, the Foreign Affairs Committee held a classified briefing so intense that two members reportedly walked out looking ashen, refusing to answer any press questions beyond a terse "no comment." Not exactly reassuring. Meanwhile, security inside central London tightened so suddenly it caught even seasoned journalists off guard. Barricades were quietly erected around key government buildings. Armed police doubled outside the Foreign Office. Surveillance drones began hovering over the Thames long before sunrise. None of it was announced. None of it explained. And when reporters pressed officials for clarification, they were stonewalled with the same chilling line. Operational measures cannot be disclosed at this time, meaning something is happening, something big, but they refuse to say what. And the public, of course, is left to guess whether this is caution or preparation. Inside Parliament, the atmosphere grew even more volatile. MPs from multiple parties began whispering about a classified annex within Putin's message. An additional segment British officials deliberately blocked from the official summary. One member described it as the part they don't want anyone outside the intelligence community to see, which is an incredible statement coming from someone who supposedly runs the country. Rumours suggest it contains a threat tied to a specific UK action abroad, and Moscow is demanding immediate reversal. Immediate as in no negotiations, no delays, no committees, no debates, just compliance or consequences. And that, of course, leaves Britain trapped in a dilemma that feels designed to break it. If the UK complies, it signals weakness to every adversary watching. If it refuses, it risks direct confrontation with a nation that has already proven it is willing to escalate without hesitation. Even more alarming, military insiders have begun quietly suggesting that the UK may already have moved certain assets into repositioning status. Not deployment, but not peace posture either. These are the subtle shifts experts watch closely, the kind that indicate the government believes the situation could worsen in hours, not days. So why hasn't the Prime Minister addressed the nation? Why hasn't the government been transparent? Why does it feel like they're protecting themselves more than the public? Especially when leaked audio from a late-night emergency cabinet call suggests senior ministers were arguing over how much the public should be told. Imagine that, not if the public deserves the truth, not when they'll reveal it, but how little can be safely disclosed without sparking nationwide panic. Across the Atlantic, the White House has now entered the picture in a way that's raising even more suspicion. Reports indicate that American officials were briefed on the situation before several British ministers were. That's right. Washington may have known more about the threat to Britain than Britain itself. And almost immediately after receiving those briefings, senior US defense leaders held their own urgent consultations, not public ones. Silent, classified, high-level calls. The kind of coordination that means everyone is bracing for a scenario nobody wants to say out loud. And yet British citizens, those who will live with the consequences of whatever happens next, have been given absolutely nothing but vague statements and a growing sense that something is very, very wrong. International allies are suddenly speaking in tones that usually precede major geopolitical shifts. Germany called the situation grave and evolving. France urged measured but firm unity. Even Canada issued a rare statement urging restraint but unshakable solidarity with the United Kingdom. When countries halfway across the world start preparing speeches before British officials have even decided what to say publicly, that's not normal. That's a sign the crisis has moved beyond the slow, careful dance of diplomacy and into something sharper, more immediate and far more unpredictable. And through all of this, Downing Street remains silent, tense, closed off. Ministers rushing in and out with folders they shield from cameras. Advisors refusing to look reporters in the eye, and the public left staring at their screens, wondering, if this situation was under control, wouldn't the government be acting like it? By the time darkness fell over London, the crisis had evolved into something far beyond a diplomatic standoff. Something that felt like the slow tightening of a noose, and while the government pretended everything was stable, sources inside the intelligence community painted a completely different picture. According to individuals who should never be speaking publicly, Britain's security agencies are now operating under what one insider called heightened continuity mode, a status only activated when a nation anticipates a sudden escalation, not hopes, not fears, anticipates. Analysts were pulled from unrelated assignments. Secure rooms, normally reserved for counter-terror operations, were sealed off for Russia-only briefings, and at least one cyber response team was instructed to remain on station for the next 24 hours without breaks. For perspective, those orders haven't been issued since the Salisbury attack, except this time, nobody is talking about nerve agents. They're talking about possibilities far more catastrophic. Meanwhile, a wave of panic is quietly rippling through the business and financial sectors. Not public panic, behind the scenes panic. Senior executives from major UK telecoms were summoned to an emergency meeting at the Department for Science and Technology. No one will confirm what was discussed, but leaked messages suggest the government asked about continuity protocols in the event of targeted foreign interference. In simpler terms, what happens if Russia decides to flip a digital switch and plunge parts of Britain into silence? And while officials try to keep these concerns hidden, the markets aren't stupid. The pound wobbled. Energy suppliers requested updated risk guidance. Insurance firms requested clarification on potential national disruption scenarios. People with power always know before the public does, and right now they know something is coming. But perhaps the most chilling developments are happening not in offices, but in military corridors far from the cameras. RF stations from Lossiemouth to Marham reported sudden late-night activity. Aircraft rollouts normally scheduled days in advance were pushed forward without explanation. Naval bases increased shore security. And according to a source within Defence HQ, one minister demanded a classified simulation on probable Russian response patterns if the UK refuses to comply. That is not the sort of request made by someone confident in diplomacy. That's made by someone preparing for the worst case scenario and needing to know just how quickly things could spiral out of control. When even the military isn't sure how the next 48 hours will unfold, the country is balancing on a knife's edge. Inside Parliament, tensions have reached a point so high they're starting to spill into public view. A leaked clip from a closed session shows MPs arguing over whether the UK should release at least part of Putin's message to calm the public. One voice can be heard saying, "You're underestimating the consequences of silence." Another snaps back, "You're underestimating the consequences of the truth." That one sentence tells you everything. The truth is apparently so explosive, so destabilising, that the government is genuinely choosing panic by ignorance over panic by information. Imagine how bad something must be for politicians to agree that honesty would make everything worse. And then there's the international reaction. As if on cue, NATO's leadership held an unplanned late evening conference call, pulling in representatives from every allied nation. Official spokespeople insisted it was routine. Routine? NATO doesn't schedule emergency calls on a quiet Tuesday night unless something has gone terribly wrong. Even more telling, 2 Eastern European allies have begun repositioning certain defensive assets quietly. No announcements, no press statements, just silent movement, because they know exactly what Russia is capable of, and they know how fast a localised crisis can ignite something much larger. But the most shocking shift came just after midnight when a credible journalist with deep contacts inside the Foreign Office revealed that Putin's message ended with a phrase British officials are calling deeply destabilising. A line so blunt that multiple sources have refused to repeat it. One simply said, "This is not a warning, it's an ultimatum dressed as diplomacy." And that language is what terrified MPs, because an ultimatum suggests consequences, severe ones. And as the deadline ticks closer, Britain still has no public plan, no official statement, and no clear strategy, at least not one they're willing to reveal. Late tonight, the Prime Minister met privately with senior military leaders, intelligence directors and the Cabinet's National Security Group. Every advisor present reportedly left the room knowing that the next announcement, whether made publicly or kept hidden, will define Britain's future role on the world stage. Strength or retreat, defiance or concession, unity or fracture, there is no middle. One wrong sentence could spark retaliation, one moment of hesitation could embolden an adversary, and one miscalculated decision could drag Britain into a confrontation it may not be ready for. So now the entire nation is stuck, holding its breath, waiting for an answer from leaders who refuse to speak, waiting for details officials are terrified to release, waiting to see whether Putin's threat is a bluff, a trap, or a prelude to something far more dangerous.